When he finally reached the compound, the sight of the dimly lit house gave him some comfort. At least here, his mother would praise him. He had brought back the golden rake, the proof of his success. But even as he entered the house, something didn't feel right. There was a coldness in the air, a heaviness that clung to him, making his skin prickle. Nia was waiting for him by the fire, her eyes glittering with expectation. Obina sat nearby, leaning forward with wide eyes, eager to hear what his brother had brought back from the mysterious forest. "Well?" Nia's voice was sharp, but there was excitement bubbling just beneath the surface. "Did you get what I asked for?" Uzo nodded and held up the golden rake. The firelight flickered off the shiny metal and Nia's eyes lit up with greed. "Yes," Uzo muttered, his voice shaky. "The spirit gave me this." Nia's eyes widened, her fingers twitching with the urge to touch the gleaming rake. She grabbed it from him, her smile growing wider as she ran her hands over the polished surface. "And the flute?" she asked, her voice lowering. "Did it give you a flute like Chike's?" Uzo hesitated, a knot forming in his throat. "Yes, it gave me one, but..." He paused, his voice trailing off. "When I played it, the sound was horrible." "Horrible?" Nia's smile faltered, her brows knitting together in confusion. "What do you mean, horrible? Let me hear it." Uzo stepped back slightly, shaking his head. "Mama, I think something's wrong. The spirit..." Nia's eyes flashed with impatience. "Nonsense! Give me the flute!" Reluctantly, Uzo pulled the flute from his tunic and handed it to her. Nia examined it for a moment, turning it over in her hands. It looked the same as the one Chike had, carved from smooth bone, with intricate symbols running along its surface. She scoffed. "Play it!" Uzo's heart raced. "Mama, I don't think..." "Play it, Uzo!" she demanded, her voice rising. "The spirit gave it to you, so it must be good. You just didn't play it properly. Now play it." Uzo hesitated, but he knew better than to argue with his mother when she used that tone. His hands shook as he raised the flute to his lips. He took a deep breath and blew into it, trying to summon the magic that had filled Chike's flute with warmth and light. But what came out was the same terrible sound as before. A high-pitched grating noise like the screech of rusted metal filled the room. It was harsh, discordant, and wrong. Uzo stopped immediately, his face pale, his hands trembling. Before he could say anything, the wind outside began to howl. The fire flickered violently, and the air in the room turned cold, so cold that Nia shivered despite the flames in the hearth. The shutters rattled, and the wind seemed to press against the walls, like something angry trying to force its way inside. The shadows in the corners of the room grew darker, longer, twisting like they were alive. "Mama," Obina whispered, his voice filled with fear as he backed away from the window. "What's happening?" Nia stared at Uzo, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What? What did you do?" she hissed. I don't know," Uzo stammered, his voice cracking. "I just played it like you said." The wind grew stronger and the room seemed to hum with an eerie energy. Pots and utensils rattled on the shelves, and the flames in the hearth danced wildly, casting strange shapes on the walls. From outside, a low, rumbling noise echoed through the night, almost like the growl of a beast. The wind swept through the room, knocking over a stack of bowls and sending them crashing to the floor. "Enough!" Nia shouted, grabbing the flute from Uzo's hands and throwing it onto the table. This is some kind of trick. It's nothing." But even as she spoke, the wind swirled around them, colder and more menacing than before. Nia's words fell flat against the storm brewing inside the house. The shadows danced unnaturally, their long fingers stretching toward them. Suddenly, the wind stopped. The room fell into an eerie silence, the only sound the crackling of the weak fire. Uzo stood frozen, his face pale as he looked at his mother. "What is happening?" he whispered, barely able to form the words. Nia said nothing. For the first time, there was fear in her eyes, though she quickly hid it behind a mask of anger. "Go to bed," she snapped. "All of you." Uzo and Obina exchanged nervous glances but obeyed, retreating to their corner of the room. The strange chill still lingered in the air as Nia snuffed out the last embers of the fire. But deep down, Nia knew something was wrong. She had thought she could control the spirits, bend their magic to her will. Now she wasn't so sure. The night passed fitfully. The wind had died down, but the uneasy energy remained. The house was quiet, but there was a heaviness in the air that made it hard to breathe. Even Chike, sleeping in his corner, felt the tension. Though he hadn't witnessed the flute's failure, he had sensed the shift in the atmosphere. At first light, Nia woke with a start, her body stiff and sore. She sat up, rubbing her arms, only to feel a strange bump on her skin. Frowning, she looked down and gasped. There on her arms were small red boils, angry and swollen. They dotted her skin like blisters, and as she touched one, she winced in pain. "Mama!" Uzo's voice came from across the room, filled with panic. Nia turned to see Uzo standing near the hearth, his face pale with fear. His arms were covered in boils, just like hers, red, swollen, and painful. Obina was the same, scratching at his skin with wide, horrified eyes. What is this?" Obina whimpered, tears filling his eyes. "What's happening to us?" Nia's heart raced as she frantically examined her own skin. The boils weren't just on her arms, they were spreading. Her hands, her neck, her legs, all covered in the painful, itching sores. She leapt to her feet, rushing to the small mirror by the door. Her reflection was worse than she feared. Boils had begun to appear on her face, creeping up her cheeks and across her forehead. Her beauty, her pride, was marred by the ugly blisters. "This is impossible!" Nia shrieked, slamming her fist against the wall. It's some kind of curse!" Her mind raced back to the flute, to the spirits, to the wind that had howled through the house the night before. A cold wave of realization washed over her. The spirits had been angry at Uzo's dishonesty, angry at her greed. And now they were paying the price. "What do we do, Mama?" Uzo asked, his voice trembling. "What's happening to us?" Nia's mind swirled with panic and fear. She had always been in control of her house, of her husband, of Chike. But now, something far greater than her had taken control, and she didn't know how to stop it. Meanwhile, Chike rose from his mat, feeling the heaviness in the air but unaware of what had happened. He walked into the main room, his eyes immediately drawn to the scene before him. Nia stood by the mirror, her face pale with horror. Uzo and Obina huddled together, scratching at their arms covered in angry red boils. Chike's breath caught in his throat. His gaze flicked to the flute still lying on the table, untouched since the night before. What happened?" Chike asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Nia turned to him, her face twisted in anger and fear. "You," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at him. "This is all your fault. You brought this upon us with your cursed flute." Chike blinked, confused. I didn't. Don't lie," Nia screamed, her voice hoarse with rage. "The spirits. They gave you the flute, and now they've cursed us." Chike's heart pounded. He could feel the tension rising, the fear radiating from Nia and her children. But he knew deep down that this wasn't his doing. The spirits had given him the flute for his honesty. Whatever was happening now was because of the greed and dishonesty that had followed. Still, he kept his voice calm. "It wasn't me," he said quietly. "The spirits, they don't curse people without reason." Nia's face twisted with rage, but there was something else there. Fear. She knew Chike was right. The spirits didn't curse without reason, and now they were paying the price for trying to cheat them. Chike stood silently, watching as Nia's anger turned inward. She had wanted power, but the spirits had given her something else. Punishment. And this was only the beginning.